everybody. My name is Dana, and welcome to our podcast, The Daily Microbe. Good morning if you're listening to this in the morning, or good afternoon if you're listening to this in the afternoon. So I'm here today with two of my friends who are biologists. Hey, Olivia.
Hi.
Hey, Elise.
Hi.
And today we'll be discussing some food handling tips and preparation and proper storage techniques if you're working in a cafeteria or in any food environment. So just to start off, a microorganism is a small living organism, and it only takes a little bit to infect food. And when a microorganism infects food, it creates an outbreak or a foodborne illness. And to have a foodborne illness and outbreak, it only takes two people to become infected with it. So that just shows you how fast and efficient a microbe works. So today in our podcast, we'll be talking more about how to deal with foodborne illnesses and outbreaks. And after the podcast, there is an informational video on how to properly wash your hands and wear PPE if you're working in the hospital and you have to deliver food to your patients. So we'll get started now.
So why is it important that we learn about foodborne illnesses and keep outbreaks under control?
So that's actually a really great question, Olivia. So it's important to maintain a safe food environment, because if you have a foodborne illness outbreak, you can potentially have a loss of customers and your business reputation. Or you can have a numerous amount of lawsuits coming your way, or increased insurance and embarrassment. And you can also have a lower employee morale. So it's really important to establish food safety into the workforce, make sure that your employees are well trained, and the most important thing to start off with is washing your hands. Do you agree, right? Washing your hands?
Of course.
I think that's really important to start off with, and that's the major thing that will help prevent the spread of microorganisms.
Are there any people that are more susceptible to this outbreak more than others?
So that's a really good point to bring up. And yes, so infants and preschoolers are at higher risk of getting infected. Pregnant women, elderly people taking certain medications, seriously ill people who are mostly in hospitals and have weakened immune systems, and that's the population that we're referring to now at Faber Hospital.
So are there any kinds of foods that microbes really favor to grow on?
Yes, so you'll find them rapidly growing in foods like poultry, milk, fish, shellfish, eggs, heat-treated plant foods, and untreated garlic. That's pretty interesting to know. Yes. Yeah, it isn't a lot of foods. They can also be found in baked potatoes and sliced melons. And it's important to also note that microorganisms like to grow in wet food and in protein food.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so just keep that in mind when working in a food handling environment.
How does food even become unsafe to begin with?
So that's actually a great point, and that's a question that will lead us into a further discussion throughout our podcast. So in the first place, food becomes unsafe because of time-temporal abuse, so not cooking food correctly and receiving food at inappropriate temperatures and just not checking temperatures in general. Also, you want to keep in mind cross-contamination. So, for example, if you're using the same cutting board to cut every single food that you have on, that will cross-contaminate and will lead to an outbreak potentially. Also, you want to keep in mind that practicing poor personal hygiene is also a factor in food becoming unsafe. So you want to promote personal hygiene in the workforce, make sure that your employees are washing their hands, keeping their hair up, and most importantly, practicing cross-contamination techniques and storing food at the right temperatures.
So when you were talking about cross-contamination, what exactly do you mean by that?
That's a good question. So cross-contamination just simply means when microorganisms are transferred from one surface to another. So going back to the cutting board example, if you're using the same cutting board to cut several types of foods, that will cross-contaminate the food. So.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah. So since this whole podcast is about microbes, and our podcast is called The Daily Microbe, just expanding on that, microorganisms, again, are just small living organisms. And they're different from pathogens. A pathogen is an illness-causing organism. So a microorganism can contribute to a pathogenic outbreak. And a toxin is a poison. So microorganisms, again, contaminate food and can cause foodborne illnesses. And examples of microorganisms are bacteria, fungus, parasites, and your viruses.
So where would I know where to begin for proper food handling measures?
Good question, Olivia. So, first things first, right when you get hired on the job, if you're working in a cafeteria or any food environment, you'll be trained right when you get hired. And anytime you're in the workforce and you feel like you're not comfortable with anything, feel free to ask your boss. I think having a relationship with your managers and your coworkers is important to if you have any more questions. For example, our big boss is Jason Andrus, and he makes the calls on everything, so it's important to have good connections with your managers and your coworkers because, once you come through a stump in the road or something, it's nice to have a good relationship with everybody there. And so with training, you'll be taught food handling. And with food handling, there's 4 easy steps. So you want to remember to keep yourself clean, so washing your hands, keeping your hair up, practicing good personal hygiene, and you want to keep the surfaces that you work on clean to prevent cross-contamination, like we talked about in the beginning of the podcast a little bit. And then you want to separate everything. So again, don't cross-contaminate. You don't want the transfer of microbes going everywhere. And then you want to make sure you cook your food at the right temperature, because if you cook your food at a lower temperature, then microorganisms can grow, or if it's higher temperatures. Yeah. And then you want to appropriately chill, so refrigerate if needed. So that's important to know when you're working in the food environment.
Oh yeah, that definitely brings up a good point. As a biologist, I always am controlling the growth of microbes through temperature, such as when we want to preserve a culture, we'll usually stick it in the refrigerators because it won't grow usually in cold environments.
Oh, so yeah, so that, cooking food properly and just freezing food properly. So just appropriately know your guidelines and know how to refrigerate your food and at proper temperatures. And I guess time plays a good factor in it.
I would say so.
Minimizing the time food spends in certain temperatures, because I think, as biologists, you guys work with temperature danger zones.
Yeah.
So I think that's something, that's important to also keep in mind. Temperature danger zones. Don't put food in environments that will have them grow certain microbes.
So we have been talking about food handling. Like, how would you start?
So after food handling, you would go into preparation. That's your next step. So with preparation, the first step is always washing your hands with warm water and soap for at least 20 seconds before and after handling your food. So there's a range. You can wash your hands for 20 to 25 seconds. Usually you'll hear people tell you to hum or sing a certain song. So I guess, for example, you could sing the happy birthday song twice, and that would take you to 20 to 25 seconds, and you'd know that you'd washed your hands efficiently or effectively. So that's the first one. I don't know, do you guys have another song in mind?
Nothing comes to mind.
Yeah,
I've always used Happy Birthday.
Yeah.
I wish I was more creative with that.
Happy birthday. All right. So the next step is, we want to avoid cross-contamination. We want to keep the raw meat, your poultry, your fish, and juices away from other foods. So using your different cutting boards, as the example that we used earlier. And after cutting raw meats, you want to wash your cutting boards to prevent cross-contamination. Again, that's like the favorite word of the podcast today, word of the day. You want to wash your cutting boards, washing your utensils and countertops with hot soapy water, so the bacteria that's living on your surface dies away. And then after washing everything that you've used, you want to use your cutting boards, your utensils, and countertops you want to sanitize everything by using a solution, and usually we use an unscented solution of liquid chlorine. It could be 1 tablespoon, and mixed in with a gallon of water. So that's usually how we sanitize countertops if we don't have any fancy products on hand. And then if you have meat or poultry, you want to marinate them in a covered dish in the fridge. So that's an example of how you could prep, meats and juices, and how to prevent the cross-contamination from other foods.
Like, how do we know, how long these foods are good for in the refrigerator or
the freezer?
The freezer.
So there's certain guidelines, and each food is stored in a different temperature, but you want to be careful because, referring back to the temperature danger zone that we talked about, this range is from 41 degrees Fahrenheit to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is where food-borne microorganisms grow. And so in your training manual, you will be given a cold storage chart, which lets you know all the different kinds of refrigerator temperatures and freezer temperatures that each food is stored in. So, for example, if you would have let's say you had hard-cooked eggs. They're good in the refrigerator for up to 1 week at 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and they do not freeze well. So, hard-cooked eggs do not go in the freezer. Another example, let's say you had hot dogs for lunch. They would be stored in a fridge at 40 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 week, and they can actually be stored in the freezer for up to 1 to 2 months.
Wow.
Yeah, so every certain food has its own guideline, but if you're ever unsure, refer back to the training manual. It's a really easy chart that lets you know what temperatures to store your food in, and you can always ask your coworkers or your manager. In our case, it would be Big Boss Andress. And so it's really easy. It's provided, nothing to be nervous or worried about.
Oh yeah, my favorite food is pizza, and I love to have it for breakfast in the morning the next day.
Pizza for breakfast?
Oh yeah. There's nothing better than cold pizza, so I know that I can store it in the fridge for 3 to 4 days, but I didn't know that I could also freeze it for 1 to 2 months, but I feel like I probably wouldn't want that then.
Yeah, see? Everybody needs a cold storage chart. So,
it's very helpful.
Yeah, it's very helpful. So don't worry, you'll be provided this. Ask your manager if you're unsure of where it is placed. And this leads us into our next topic for our podcast. We want to talk a little bit about pasteurization. Have you guys worked with that in the labs before?
Yeah, don't you pasteurize milk?
Yeah, so yes, milk is pasteurized. And do you guys know who developed the pasteurization process?
Louis Pasteur, right?
Yeah, he, the man, Louis the Man Pasteur. I guess that's how you say it, I think.
Yeah.
And so pasteurization essentially is the use of heat to kill pathogens, and it's reducing the number of spoilage microorganisms in food and beverages. And Louis the Man first started this on beer and wine, and then eventually it led into increasing milk safety for the consumers, and it increases milk safety by destroying disease-causing microorganisms or pathogens that may be present in the milk, and to increase keeping the quality of milk products by destroying spoilage microorganisms. They pasteurize the milk, and then this can also contribute to the reduced quality and shelf life of milk. So a pro of this process is it can keep things on the shelf longer, so longer shelf life. So initially, pasteurization was a way to prevent wine and beer from souring, and it would be many years before milk was pasteurized. So milk came into the process later on, and it's important in the workforce now, again, because it's increasing milk safety for consumers who consume milk, especially in the hospital.
So we've been talking a lot about food safety. Are there any measures that food handlers can take when they're preparing and serving and storing the food so foodborne illnesses don't run rampant through the hospital?
Of course. So that's one of the most important parts of all of this. And, if you've dozed off while listening to our podcast, this is one of the most important points to remember. So if you're working in a food service environment, such as the cafeteria here at the hospital, then, workers and employees should remember to wash your hands, and that illnesses can come up without you even knowing because of this. So practicing good personal hygiene, so maintaining personal cleanliness or wearing proper work attire. If you have to wear a gown while going into a patient's room, then wear a gown and a mask and gloves. So make sure you gown up. You want to make sure you're following, the correct hygienic hand practices, avoiding unsanitary habits and actions, the common sense stuff. And, of course, maintaining good health and reporting your illnesses.
Definitely.
You don't want to come into work sick, because if you do, then you'll contaminate your environment and the food, which then goes on to the patient, and the patient who already, for example, has a weakened immune system can get even more sick.
Definitely. It's just better to stay home.
Yes, better to stay home if you're sick. Let your manager know. For example, Big Boss Andrus always tells us, wash your hands. If you don't feel sick, then don't come to class.
Definitely.
At least we would hope he would say that. So, for proper hand washing procedures, you want to make sure that the minimum water temperature is at least 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't dry with a cloth towel.
Definitely not.
Definitely. So, and then another thing to keep in mind is hand antiseptics. So hand sanitizer, for example, first of all, it must comply with the FDA standards, and it should be used after hand washing. And never should it be used in place of hand washing. So when in doubt, always wash your hands, but do not use hand sanitizer when you're in doubt. And so this leads us to the next point of, washing your hands. When do I wash my hands? So you must wash your hands after using the restroom, handling raw meat and poultry, fish, touching the hair, face, or body, sneezing into your hands, coughing, or using a tissue, after smoking, eating, drinking, chewing gum, handling chemicals, or taking out the trash. Those are just brief examples, but again, whenever in doubt, wash your hands.
Okay, so I love to get manicures. So, what's, the proper nail care that we should do?
So the ladies usually tend to have the most problem with this. So for nail care, you want to make sure that you're keeping your fingernails short and clean. You don't want to wear your false nails or nail polish. If you're wearing nail polish, you want to make sure that you wear gloves just in case, but we do prefer that people come in with short, clean nails, no nail polish, no fake nails, because bacteria accumulates a lot around your nail beds.
What about my rings and jewelry? Because I love to wear jewelry.
Yeah, I love to wear my jewelry too.
Mm-hmm.
But while you're working, you want to make sure that everything is put away. So anything dangly, especially, you want to take that off. Rings, you want to take that off as well. Those are things that also accumulate bacteria, and then that can cross-contaminate with the food, and then which can, lead to some sort of foodborne illness or outbreak. So just to wrap up, these are all measures that are important for all employees to take to prevent foodborne illnesses and outbreaks. So, since we're nearing the end of our podcast, I'd like to open the floor up to my two special guests and ask if do you guys have any questions for me?
Yeah, I have a question. I love buffets, and I know in the hospital cafeteria there are a couple buffets. Do you have any suggestions for food safety tips for buffets, since people can come and grab as they please and get as much as they want? I feel like it would be kind of difficult to maintain proper sanitation. So is there any guidelines we could give to the workers?
For sure. So in the cafeteria line, to store food in a buffet, you want to keep your food safe by having sneeze guards. We've seen those before, and they're supposed to be at least 14 inches above the food counter and 7 inches beyond the food. Okay. So that just gives, a little bit of space for cross-contamination if it were to occur. So sneeze guards for sure are something that should be in place.
Yeah, definitely.
And for serving food, hot food should be held at 140 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer. Cold food should be held at 40 degrees Fahrenheit or colder. And when you're serving food at a buffet, you want to keep the food hot with chafing dishes. Chafing. Just words of the day today. Chafing dishes, slow cookers, or warming trays. And you want to keep your food cold by nesting dishes in bowls of ice or using small serving trays and making sure you replace them often. And perishable food also should not be left out more than 2 hours at room temperature. The guideline is 1 hour when the temperature is above 90 degrees Fahrenheit.
Well, thank you. That really helps clarify a lot of
I hope it does. Yes. So does anyone have any more questions?
No, you answered it. You covered them all.
Alrighty. So that wraps up our podcast of the Daily Microbe for today. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to any of my special guests today, Olivia or Elise, or myself, Dana. Or you can refer to any of the training manuals that are provided. And also there will be a video to teach everybody how to properly wash your hands and how to properly gown up. So thank you all for tuning in today. And thank you for being here today, guys.
So it was our pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
And have a nice day.
Bye.